So it's the divination episode, or at least the sort of intro to divination, how we all got started with divination, tips for divination, because everyone loved the scrying episode. I think that's the one we had the most feedback on in general, because it was more, candid. It's not necessarily a research episode. It's just trying to pop off a little bit about our own experiences and how we got to where we are, which I'm super thankful for that people find fascinating and intriguing and helpful. It means a lot to us, obviously, if it can convey something meaningful to you. So a few minutes before we hit the record button, I was asking Salt and Key, what do you guys think it would be a good way to kind of open up with this? And they were like, oh, let's all draw a card. Let's all have something to kind of get the conversation started, because obviously this is a subject we can talk about forever. All three of us offer divinatory services in one way or another professionally. So it's definitely something that we don't necessarily have want for topics, but we all pulled something. You know what, Key, how about you start us off? What did you get?
All right, so I pulled a card out of my all-time fave, the Blaue Eule Lenormand deck.
Blue Owl.
Because, yeah, exactly. It's got owls on it. I love it. And it's in German. So I got the card that starts it all, conveniently enough. I got Der Ritter, or the Rider, which is the Nine of Hearts. Of course, a very good omen for the start of journeys, unless he is impeded by something, which in this case, just one card, which is a bit, of course, taboo when reading with Lenormand, because they're often read in pairs. So if we're doing like a tableau, he would be by default paired with the rider himself, which is a good omen for this. It's a good new beginnings. It's double rider.
Oh, in that case, maybe we could pair it with my card, because speaking of German, I'm using the Zigeuner Wasserkarten. So this is a Gypsy Oracle card deck. It's from Austria. It's the green pack. For those of you who know what I'm referring to, it's the one that became incredibly popular in the Balkans because there's 6 languages in which each of the names of the cards are printed on. So it's German, Croatian, French, English, Hungarian, and Italian at the very bottom. So the card that I got is Gedanken. So this is thought. Pensée, missão, pensiero, gondolat. So it has all of them, which is of course why on the one hand it became very popular, because it has Croatian, Serbo-Croatian, so it's spread all across the Serbo-Croatian Bosnian kind of language family group within the Balkans. But also we get this great ability to read. It's very similar to Lenormand and how it's read. Many of the figures are the same, but there are also others. And I would say we can pair maybe thought with a writer. I think very good for an episode, right? In which we are quite literally about to dispense our literal reflections on the matter. And you have this like beautiful illustration of like a good old philosopher kind of reclining on his park bench, where he's having a good old thinker moment, as it were. And Salt, what are you up to? Did you pull a card, or do you have something else?
Yeah, so I've got the horoscopic figure for the start of the recording open up here, and we have Jupiter in the Ascendant in the sign of Taurus, with the ruler of the Ascendant in the 4th angle, and she is retrograde and under the beams. But one thing that's noteworthy here is that the ruler of the Ascendant is in a process of making her hierarchical rising. She's coming free of the beams of the sun, and so there's kind of this renewed life and rejoicement as the star of Venus returns to life, essentially after a period of setting under his beams, and the cycle of life continues, and she's nourishing and growing. Also, star of Jupiter in the Ascendant is just here bringing celebration, bounties, and happiness, much as we feel recording this episode for you folks. The only thing I would say about this would be, don't take any doctors offering to do a bloodletting on this day. And you'll know why if you've seen the almanac.
Oh my goodness, that's funny. I mean, even just as like kind of like a meme, it's not really necessarily a serious divination that of us went into like a mantic trance to pull the card. I think it's kind of cute, that we ended up having a fairly coherent, spread, as it were. What started off as just kind of like a palate cleanser ended up being kind of real.
Which is pretty good. I think even when the auspices of the tasks slip into the stream of just manipulating cards, you're onto something.
Yeah, I mean, we all live in houses full of spirits, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Things are gonna be happening. But with that said, let's let that funky tune play and chat a little bit about being Mancers of Mincy. Be not alarmed at the frightful howls which you may hear. It's finger, salt, and burning incense key.
Hello, hello. We are burning incense today, indeed. Got some musk going. Just for the theme of it, because of course it has to be musk.
Yeah. Always ever on top, aren't we?
Also some myrrh.
Also some
Doing all right today.
Going right.
You
But
gotta
why?
cool it down sometimes, you know.
Yeah. But why burning incense? Like, why is that the B today?
So I will hand that one directly to Salt. If he is good with answering that, and why we're burning incense for a divination episode.
I mean, besides auguries, there's and obviously reading omens and incense. A little bird told me that Salt has quite a lot of experience with this exact matter.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of traditions around burning incense and observations of the smoke, right? I think a lot of modern commentators think about, the shape in particular as being especially prominent, but there's a whole range of factors that can come into it. I think in particular, northern China especially, it's very prominent there. It's part of the folk divination that's done. It's done in the south as well, but in the north is a very special way of doing it where it's not even the practitioner looking at the incense, it's the spirits divining, using it. And I just love that kind of idea, right? Of the spirits coming down to possess the disciple and just being like, hey, okay, burn this incense this way. I'm going to look at it real quick and I'm going to help determine the answers here. Rather than just a spirit just coming down and saying things that he wants to divine as well. And I just love that idea, right? Spirits divining for the questions that we're asking them. Like crazy, but fucking awesome.
I think that goes to the heart, something that I think we've all experienced, and plenty of our mentors have kind of passed on to us as well, which is the notion of like when the spirit is not just like divining with you in the sense of this is the spirit that you're consulting for a question, and they're the ones that are manipulating the cards, that are manipulating the beans, that are manipulating the figures, so that when you choose to stop etching or lines or rolling your dice or flipping your coins or poking holes in the sand for geomancy, when do you stop? When do you know if it's an odd or an even number? It's up to the spirit that is presiding over the divination. It's up to the gnomes. It's up to the anima mundi, whatever you might want to call it, that is particularly invested in this. Something that comes to mind with that is also the spirits doing their own divinations independent of us. How did they seek out information? The spirits in your court that are more like spies that go out and find information on things and people and resources for you and come back, and then you dream of them and suddenly have a flurry of intuitions, as we kind of mentioned in our scrying episode. You're suddenly overcome with the understanding of where you'll find a particular resource. And of course, that can come through dreams and daydreams, as we mentioned in that episode. But other things too is like when spirits have their own divination sets. What happens when you give a deck or a set of beans or something like that to a spirit and say, this is your lamp, this is your thing. I'll read with mine, or I'll read with you with this. But at times, they might want their own significator when you're reading with them. They might want to do their own thing. I've literally had spirits play incredibly long matches of chess and even Go against me. I know this is something that he is very well versed in terms of spirits of his that he plays extended matches of Go and Shogi with. And it ultimately, that is its own form of divination. The spirit is communicating a particular wisdom and how what their strategy that they adopt in this is. And for those wondering, like, how are the pieces moving? At least in my case, it's communicated to me where I should put it. But I don't think about like, oh, I understand a strategy. Like, it only comes clear to me later, like what technique they're building. Because although at times I will completely confess to, at times I'm walking down stairs from the morning after waking up and seeing that a piece is actually moved on the chessboard, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very similar state for me, where usually there's like the one particular spirit who's very fond of like those kind of types of games in my court, who I perform this exercise with, and he'll be like, oh, put the piece here, or like point, kind of apparate and point to the board and be like, move it here. But in similar scenarios, I've left a game for a day or two because these are kind of the classical multi-day long correspondence matches, and pieces will be shifted around both of my own and of that particular spirit's during the night, which always fun to see. One of the divinations that I actually like to use that method for more than most other systems that I'm familiar with is in matters of victory, namely like, will such and such candidate win this election? Will such and such team win this game? Will such and such event come to pass, when it's like a very specific binary? Having each player become the significator of a particular outcome,
That's really
and
cool.
then determining what happens from there.
Yeah. That's really awesome because I know we've practiced some divination questions on things that we can immediately find out. So it's one thing to be like, oh, how did this person die? You don't know. And then you look at the Wikipedia page, for example. That could be an interesting test. But like the things in the near future, like we both read on like mayoral or elections, for example, like local offices, we've looked at outcomes of matches and things of that nature. Because why would a spirit notice information? Because it's one that you rely on to send out to determine these things. It's one that can look at the broader formations of the information at play, the ones that are really good at interfacing with larger. I don't really like to use the word egregore, to be honest, but I think people will understand what I mean if I say there's like the collective intelligence of like an organization or like a building or like a library, and seeing how these institutions play together, I think is really helpful. I do like the just going back to the board game example, I have found it interesting because I've never had that happen with Go. Like one of the pieces like come out of the bowl and end up being positioned on one of the lines. But I've had that happen with chess for sure, where a pawn will move or something like that. Most dramatically, I've had a bishop move several spaces diagonally, but it's one of those things where it's never my pieces that are moving. So I just thought it was fascinating that you mentioned that yours have moved as well, because in my case, it's always the opponents that I'm facing that will move.
I think a lot of that has to do with like the very specific permutation of like dream sorcery that's involved with that particular spirit, and like the world that he pulls me into being like kind of overlaid with this particular one, in which case it can continue sometimes.
Especially considering like the way that particular spirit operates, I think you've kind of, I know who you're referring to. So for the sake of privacy, we won't go much more into it, but I do really like the way that work with him and the way that particular, like the way that he teaches you things and the way it's so somatic is really fascinating, because we talk about divination as a way to like understand or be able to kind of get a better sense of the world. And I think that one way that I want to kind of start off this discussion with, because there's obviously many ways we could go into it in terms of unlikely methods of divination, things kind of inherent to us that we're comfortable talking about publicly. We could do a whole thing on just board games, because I was recently thinking about how, like, with a good friend of mine who's really interested in Santísima Muerte, how some of the original kind of figurines that were used for her in Mexico, way before the Grim Reaper statue became kind of emblematic, where it was the queen chess piece that would be hidden at churches, and all these things will be done to it. So we could definitely go on all those tangents. But for now, one thing that kind of I always think of in terms of, before even asking how do we get started with divination, is how do we know when to divine? Because every system will have its warning about too much divination, like over divining, seeking the answer too much to the point that it gets. I'm trying to think of a way to phrase it, because on the one hand, it's kind of like you're constantly zooming in until at one point you lose your focus. Like it's like when you're expanding an image too much, it becomes so blurry. On the other hand, it can lead to excessive paranoia and kind of anxiety around questions. Like, you need to know everything. You need to know exactly how each day is going to go. It can immobilize you. I think a question to always to ask yourself with regards to divination is, how are you maximizing your agency through this practice? Do you need to confirm absolutely every impulse that you have or hear? Can you just let something sit and later on confirm that it was necessary, relevant? Does every single spirit message need to be backed up with a particular divination? Is there ever can we just have room for just pure discussion, an occasional checking in? I think obviously kind of leading us there, there's obviously a very important way to go about that. But another thing is just when do you consult your oracles? Salt, I actually wanted to talk to you a little bit about this, because I think astrology has some built-in safety guards against over divining, especially with horary. But at the same time, people are very happy and prone to overly check what the stars are like in every moment, including times when the stars are a little too distant to even be saying something about that in particular, like in the case of fixed stars for absolutely every moment, right? They are fixed after all. It's one thing about where the moon is or what the ascendant is another thing entirely as to like what a star is, that distant from you and ruling large epochs of time, as opposed to the minutiae of your life is saying. So I thought I'd pass that off to you first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a really important question, right? And I think you bring up fixed stars as a great example, actually, because they're rising and setting every day in terms of the horizon. Obviously, hierarchical risings and settings are more of a yearly thing, but it's very much a situation in astrology where when you look at a Hori chart, you should be looking to see if it's radical. I know a lot of people don't. I know a lot of people like I don't think it's appropriate to do that, but in my opinion, it's very much important. It's very crucial because a radical chart, the term radical here, obviously meaning rooted, is a confirmation that the chart is congruent with the matter because astrology is broad, right? The stars are always up there. But how do you know they're relevant to the question? How do you know this question is originating from a celestial influence? Well, obviously, the astrologer is going to say everything comes from a celestial influence, but how do you know they're answering? And it's by looking at if the chart's radical. For example, let's say someone's saying, okay, my friend's got a business dealing going on. I want to look at a Hori chart and see, will this come to fruition? Will this succeed? This is a massive salary change he's going to receive. If that happens, he might not need to receive financial support from me. So we look at a chart, okay? And we see it has nothing to do with the question. Like it just doesn't link up with the question. And why would a chart's not radical? But let's say Mercury's there. Well, okay, Mercury's lordly hour. He's in the ascendant. The moon's in a domicile. She's looking at him. Like there's all kinds of situations where you just kind of want to make sure that not only are the spirits willing to divine, but in the case of astrology, the heaven's going to give an answer. Like I would consider this the same as a courtesy question before you pick up your tools, right? Like, hey guys, you mind if I ask this question? You mind if I do this divination in the first place? And radical charts are basically the same thing there, right? Astrology is a very technical skill set. It's a technical form of divination. That's because, Mercury himself is technical. He's dry. He's this kind of just austere figure who, well, I wouldn't say austere. It depends. Saturn Mercury here. So, but yeah, in general, like it's kind of key. It's the way that you get that permission or you get a confirmation that yes, this question is suitable. So definitely always, I think, precede your divinations with this kind of example. It doesn't have to be checking if the chart is radical as in the case of astrology. It might just be confirming with your spirits that it's even okay to look at something in the first place. Because who knows, maybe they're busy, maybe they're dealing with some other bullshit. Maybe someone's, causing some trouble elsewhere and they're already out there dealing with that. So they don't have time to ask, does X person hate Y person? They just don't have time for that. They're busy. So courtesy check-ins and also making sure they're in a place to answer those questions. And if it's something like astrology, making sure that the question is relevant to what's going on in the first place,
I love the idea of the courtesy check-in about if it's appropriate to ask. That's actually something I regularly do with my spirits in multiple systems of divination is I'll say, this is a thing that I'm thinking about. I'm letting you know ahead of time. This is the inquiry. This is the scope of the question. Do you feel it'd be appropriate to proceed into an investigation of this? Because a divination is an investigation, right? It's like you're zooming into the bacteria of a culture, but by nature of doing that, you're exposing yourself to it, right? I mentioned this before with you guys, and we were talking a little bit about divining with cards and beans and those that are matters. The essence of the question can become in some ways trapped, or the contagion of it will enter into your materials, right? So let's say I'm doing a reading for a friend and the person is concerned that they have the eye on them or are cursed or crossed in some way. And my look into this, when I'm opening up with beans, it reveals that yes, this is the case. This person is in some way influenced. The beans that I now have will never be used again for a reading because they've trapped a portion of it. It doesn't mean that the person is cured or that the beans have completely eliminated this matter. There may be other things that they will reveal that we should do in order to fully cleanse us off of them, but there's a contagion there. So I will take that particular set that I have and I'm going to take it to a crossroad or a cemetery. I'm going to burn them there. I'm going to bury them in a place. I'm going to, wash them out with certain waters over certain graves in order so that they'll be perfectly taken off that person. I won't let that person touch them. I certainly, will be very careful with how I handle them. The cloth will get tied up so that I don't touch them either at that point once the divination is complete. So that's one of those things of like, is it appropriate to read on this? You might want to think twice about which material you're using. I wouldn't use your most expensive, luxurious Etsy tarot deck or the one that you Kickstarter funded for that kind of thing. A lot of times I don't necessarily read tarot very often anymore, but I definitely grew up with it. It's something, I think my dad was the one who gave me my first ever tarot deck when I was 12. Funny enough, it was the Dragon Tarot by Nigel Suckley, not like the Rider Waite or anything like that. And I wasn't even the Dragon Girl yet, the way I came to be be not so long after. So it was definitely only a year after, actually. So it was kind of funny that the way that kind of was an omen unto itself. But it was just my dad literally picked this up for me at a bookstore, and bless him, he doesn't even speak English very well, but he just saw it and he was like Tarot, and he was like, I know what this is, and he gave it to me. It was very sweet.
It's very cozy.
It was very cozy, yeah. And a lot of us, I still have that deck. It's not one that I read with very much, or any tarot deck anymore. But even with there's a reason playing cards are so popular for this, right? You can buy them at any gas station and you can just kind of get rid of them when you need to get rid of them. Whereas for a lot of people, your prize deck is something that you might want to give to a spirit and be like, okay, we're going to read on this on matters of our personal interactions and things that you need for your vessels, for your magic. That's great. You can even take out a prominent significator or a particular card from the major arcana and keep it in the workspace when you're making all these things. You can tack it against a wall and do all kinds of things with it. But all my cards, when I used to do a lot of card stuff, would get ruined in time, with oils, with ashes. They would be burned and incorporated into things. They'd be torn up and used in different ways. I will always happily plug Professor Charles Porterfield's Deck of Spells, one of the best books on this matter. Absolutely phenomenal work from him in terms of playing card divination and the kind of hoodoo style workings that you can do with them. So he's a friend of mine that I really, really always appreciate his incredible wisdom in these matters, and absolutely phenomenal work. So highly recommend checking out Charles Porterfield's wonderful book, A Deck of Spells, that came out with Lucky Mojo. Because if you want inspiration for how to work with playing cards and also just tarot cards by nature through these kinds of things, you can so easily apply that advice to everything else. And I think that has a lot to do with how spirits, certainly at least mine, really value creativity and my ability to kind of just not just follow instructions, but kind of innovate. So being able to use someone else's wisdom for something and be like, let's take out every single card. And I've done this before when I used to do a lot of card divination, where it was like, here is every single one. Tell me what give me a premonition about this. So I'll carry, for example, the 4 of clubs and go out into the world with that spirit having blessed that card in a particular way. And something will happen to me that day that I will, including just seeing the right thing on the TV screen at the right time, that will click in me as to what that card is going to convey to me with that spirit's language, because different spirits are going to use different cards and different omens the same way. Divining with certain spirits with beings, they will always give me so many earth signs, which if you know beings, you know that the 4s are going to be very particularly kind of messy in a lot of settings, and too much earth in the chart can be very stagnant. And so it's really funny where I have to ask, wait, what is all this about then? If it's that spirit working with me, then it's going to be something very different, because that spirit is so deeply tied to that element, for lack of a better term. So in that way, when I talk about when to divine, it's also who to divine with, which is certainly something that we can also talk a lot about in this episode. But I definitely check in with them. Is it the right time to do this? Is this an appropriate question to be asking? Not to be hesitant or unconfident. Sometimes you just open up and you're like, I need to know this answer. Sorry, we're just going through it. But also just to be able to check in. Is it a question that the spirit is capable or comfortable answering? I really appreciate that about systems of yes-no style divinations, in which the spirits can immediately be like, yes, we can answer this collectively. No, not your main spirit. No, not the one that you're thinking. That's not the one that's going to speak. It'll be someone else. Then you ask, is this this kind of spirit? Is this kind of spirit? And eventually you narrow down who's speaking and who will actually proceed forward with the question. And also, if they think I love this thing, I will happily credit, our godfather Tata Bukan for this piece of advice, which has so greatly influenced my life, which is, if you have a crazy dream and you're like, that must obviously be spirit derived, something feels off about that. It's not just a normal vivid dream. And go down, you check with them, and you're like, was that from you or from one of my spirits? And if the answer is yes, the next question, the follow-up is immediately, does it matter? Should I worry about it? Is this something I got to concern myself with? And if the answer is a lot of times no, they were just in the room, they were passing through you touched, fingers somewhere in the dream world, and something's happening. They're just working on something for you in the background that you asked them to figure out for you. All this stuff is happening, right? And it's just so funny, because sometimes they're like, yeah, that crazy dream was absolutely sent by me. Don't worry about it. It's not important right now. It's because and letting go of the need for an answer, ironically, despite divination being a thing like, oh, I could know anything I want. It's actually a very, very important skill to not have to know everything all the time, because then you become restricted and essentially a tyrant in your own life. You become somebody who can't act without guidance from a spirit. You become incredibly frustrated when that is not what happens. When I don't want to say divination is wrong, in the sense that your spirit is incorrect. I mean, they can get it wrong. They're not, infallible. But it's more the sense that it didn't accurately predict the situation because it is not infallible in and of itself as a system. Your interpretation might have been off. The spirits themselves might not have been able to get the best picture of it, or circumstances changed. You're asking about something months in the future. The things that will happen, the things that can like lead up to that, as it were, can the tides of destiny and all the different factors from the egregores, as I mentioned, of the place that you want to influence your boss, but then suddenly the CEO had a scandal and now the investors are pulling away, so everyone's promotions are on halt. All this kind of stuff can happen. So it's definitely a matter of maybe ask in the future can be something that a spirit can offer you as advice.
I think as well, a lot of people's issues with like incorrect answers are like, hey, why is this all just coming up as maybe? It's like, well, did you ask first? Like the spirit just doesn't want to answer this, and now you're getting jumbled answers. Like, it's a matter of courtesy. I mean, if someone random walks up on the street, you're obviously tired, right? You're coming home from like a 16-hour shift, you're knackered, and some stranger just walks up to you and starts talking to you, or maybe it's an acquaintance, like you kind of know him, but and you're just like, oh, please stop, leave me alone. Like maybe they're like that right now, and they're just trying to say like gently, please get the hint. Like I think it's crucial. I think it's good manners. It's, important part of the procedures to be respectful of the spirits and their time. And that's why we also don't, ask the same question 5 times in a row. Like every single time that becomes a habit, it really impacts how the divination and like process of getting answers in the first place works. Like, because now you're just getting 5 different answers. The spirits are getting fed up and you're now confused because you've just, over divined, you've just jumbled every single answer. You probably offended people. Like it's definitely something to be avoided, just as asking first is something to be pursued.
Yeah, are you seeking clarity or are you causing more confusion for yourself is a really important thing, because in divination, we're always fighting against confusion and we're always seeking some kind of abundance of clarity to enter our lives. And if you keep zooming in, right, if you keep contaging, having this contagion of the effects of the matter influence you, it can be a very easy way to break your own heart. Which I think we might have touched on that in the scrying episode, just in terms of like not being extremely hard on yourself or disappointed or not sabotaging your relationship with spirits over issues in communication. Frankly, that's advice for human physically incarnated, matters too, in terms of not assuming things and then causing issues in your relationships. But I think in the case of spirits, it's really important to have respect for them as those who are doing this job for you. And also, moreover, in respect for the topic at hand, getting yourself too hyped up and anxious about a situation, shopping around for answers. We've all had clients that clearly were not happy with the answer that we gave them. They didn't like that it was not, you are the chosen one, and yes, everything that you ever have felt in your life was completely accurate. Your intuition is perfect every time, and la la la. And eventually they get to the point where they're going to just keep going to other people until they get the answer they want. And sometimes they go to a person. I've had people come back and be like, hey, you were wrong because this other person said, yes, my situation is what I want it to be. And I get that a lot with, unfortunately, with spirit marriage questions, where people, if I don't necessarily see the omens that I look for, I don't particularly scry the spirit, or the omens and the beings are quite negative, and say like, nope, something is there, but it's not what you think it is. This is a bit of projection and wishful thinking, and perhaps, a little bit of extra maladaptive daydreaming on top of wanting this to be the case, because of what you think it is, because you think it's this kind of glamorous romance novel situation. Not that that's how I'd phrase it necessarily, but it's more like it's kind of clear what my spirits are saying in this matter. I'm not the judge of your life. I'm not your priest. So it's not that you have to take this necessarily as an ultimate verdict. I encourage you to go to our diviners and get a kind of answer. But if it's like the 3 people that I recommend that I trust extremely, extremely intently that are not on our website for reading this also all agree that there's something that's kind of fishy going on. And then one random person that you chuck $5 on, to their blog, and they say, yeah, no, it's real. Who knows what their spirits are seeing, or who knows if they're just saying that because they don't want you to be upset with them. There we go. You're shopping for answers, And then I've had the same people come back years later and be like, yeah, and actually you were right. Nothing really came up with that. That was definitely my projection. And not everyone has necessarily had the grace to do that, nor do I ask for it. But it's one of those situations where don't be afraid to give a negative answer to somebody. Oftentimes, how often is everything actually going to go super well, even in our own lives? It's important. That's why we ask for things. We ask for caution. So if we're not ready for a no, I would say it's an important thing with divination. Then don't ask a question that you can't accept a no, because in that case, you're definitely not going to accept the responsibilities of the yes either.
That's one of the things that I really like about geomancy as a system is because it kind of addresses a lot of the concerns that can come up to the diviner as kind of like an aside to the reading. Like, very famously, of course, there are the configurations that are like, don't even read this chart, just destroy it, burn the paper that it's written on, come back to it a minimum of like X amount of hours later.
Yeah, like Rubius in the first house, and you're like, oh
Rubius
shit.
in the first house. Or if you have, various configurations of Populus or sometimes Rubius throughout the chart, it can signify things like, oh, this client will show up and, engage with you in the reading, but they're not going to listen to anything that you say. Or straight up, it can be, and hopefully this doesn't occur, but it could be like, well, the client is not being truthful with you. Or any number of these other, maladies of like, whatever you say to them can't really fix this problem, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that kind of goes to one of the answers of like when to divine for me is asking yourself beforehand, can a conversation fix this problem before a divination even needs to be involved? In the sense of just being like, can I just talk to like a person that I trust about the situation? Can I talk to spirits that I trust about the situation? Can I ask their opinion on things? Because I've kind of noticed with a couple different people who I've read for over the years is like very rarely is that the case. Where they just come to me being like, this happened, I need a divination. I'm like, can we talk about what happened first? And then the need evaporates shortly thereafter. So I think very quick to jump to a supernatural interpretation in some cases can be good, but I'm like, man, this could have been a 5-minute conversation. It's like the whole this meeting could have been an email thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm grateful for, the $60, $100, whatever it is you just paid me, but like this could have been a 5-minute long conversation, which you realize you didn't need this in the first place.
Oh, was that meme that's like the face you make when your friend is ranting about a situation and they're obviously not the good guy in it. You just kind of have to like listen and be like, interesting. Thankfully, I think my relationship with my friends is such that I don't have to just purse my lips and nod along. But it's that's precisely the intimacy of good friendships, is that if I'm being a little whack, my friends can actually tell me I don't agree with this. I think this is I need to help you bring you back to yourself because this is concerning. At the same time, I think you're completely right. This is something that often comes to mind with regards to, I don't know, we've all seen people who like need to, I think Salt, maybe you could speak to this, is just like kind of constantly need to like, oh, what was the ascendant when this thing happened? What were the Purans? What were these things? And it's at the same time, it's just like important to know, when can that become immobilizing? When can that actually alienate our spirits from us? So it's funny that we started a whole episode on like tips on getting started in divination, and the first thing that comes up is like when not to do it. But I think this is exceptionally important because you can, one, wear out your tools. With beans, you have to change them so often. Like it's not one set that you keep on your person. These are organic material. They're going to fall apart in time, or you're going to want to exchange them or bury them or plant them in some place, or you cook them or use them in something. On the other hand, it's definitely a situation where we're not saying like don't do it. Of course, obviously we all do it. It's just more a matter of, could this have been a phone call? It's a lesson we've all learned from the Zoom years of the pandemic for sure.
No, definitely as well. Just kind of determining when to start, when not to. It all kind of leads into this because it's good practice, right? You want to build good habits whenever you're doing divination. You want to make sure that things proceed in a way, like you kind of want a structure, right? Even when the spirits are like, okay, fuck the structure, there's still a structure in that you've listened to the spirits. And I think avoiding too much casual divination can be helpful, unless of course it's a system that's like intentionally casual, right? Like we all need something that's quick. Astrology, not that quick. Geomancy, probably not that quick, right? Kumala, maybe not the quickest. Like we can do it, but it's not the fastest method of divination. There's always something quicker. It's kind of more appropriate for just like, hey, let's pick up and have a look at this. I think that's partly why cartomancy can be so popular. I know it can be a longer process, but it can also be a quick one, right? And I think in general, like just having these procedures in place, like if you want to look at incense, for example, and that's something we're going to talk about later in the episode, you don't just burn the incense. It's a matter of calling the immortal family down from the mountains. It's a matter of having the encampment set up. It's a matter of having the spirit who's going to lead the troops And then that spirit is going to send the troops to investigate the issue. He's also going to assign troops to sit with you, the diviner, to make sure you're safe. Maybe assign someone over the client or the incense guest or pilgrim, as they're generally called. And this entire process is unfolding whilst, to our eyes, we just lit some incense and sung some songs. But like, there's this whole chaos and kerfuffle going on in the background. Like, so I think it's really good to make sure we kind of know what's really going on when we divine as well. And knowing that what to us seems to be just kind of picking something up and running through a chart is really this ginormous procedure in the background with a ton of shit going on. It's wonderful, but it's more taxing, shall we say, on the spirits around us at times than we might initially think.
Literally, I love that you raised that whole matter of you may not even notice how intense things are in your room as you're building this power. You have no idea what's happening in the spirit world sometimes. Like, you think you're just lighting some incense, and meanwhile this gate's opening and these attendants are being called to preside over the question and to refer to their lords of fate in their hierarchies to be able to give an accurate reading on this. Like, it's serious business for them, so you make sure it's serious business for you.
And that's one of the interesting things about that as well, is like sometimes it's not even our business to know what is necessarily going on. Like, if you have a spirit who's like in the divination manipulating your tools with you, giving you answers, and goes, hold on, I'll be back in a sec, leaves, comes back and is like, okay, manipulate the tools in this way now and do this other thing. It's like, what do you just go? And he's just goes, don't worry about it. It's kind of just like, he could have done any number of this myriad things in a span of time that we are not even necessarily conscious of, based on how, you know, the whole time dilution or dilation phenomena in different spirit worlds can go, like having visions that are years long in the span of an outbreath. But it's like, it's a lot more complicated in ways that we can never even understand, on top of all the things that were just listed, which are, you know, like documented lore, and the spirits are like, yeah, this is happening.
Genuinely, yeah. I think it's important to kind of realize that we aren't necessarily meant to know everything. I mean, that kind of, in some ways, even brings us back to what we were saying before, right? Like, about confirming things first. It's like sometimes the spirits will be like, yeah, you're not ready to know this yet. Or like, you know, you were talking about geomancy, or sometimes the geomancer is the one who isn't going to be able to see it, and that's probably going to be reflected in the reading. And it's such a, man, there's just there's so much to cover.
Really, yeah, I think about that a lot with the times when it's like, oh, this isn't my business to actually know. This isn't even the client's business necessarily to know. Not in some kind of cosmic overlord sense of like, it's just like ontologically not within their realm to cognate. It's actually more in the respect of like, for them to have any level of engagement with this as a fixed state, or as even, it's one thing when you're asking advice for how to approach a situation. That's fine. I find that a lot of those questions that are phrased as requesting advice from spirits is one thing. But of course, then the question is, which spirit are you consulting? Do you want to ask a spirit that is known for domination and breaking will, how you should approach your partner? Like, and then get incredibly weird BDSM answers out of them. Like, you know, that's like, well, you asked that spirit, probably not the best one to go to for that kind of thing. Or do you want to go to a question that is like the same thing, but you go to one that's all about fertility? Like, you're going to get a very particular answer. These spirits are going to have their own flavors for things. But it's also a matter of, will this freeze you into action? You should always be promoting agency within your practice and your life, and getting paralyzed by over divining or by needing the divination from a spirit, because remember, they're signing off on something. You know, you can hold them accountable to this. Even if you choose not to, you could. If the spirit says this thing is going to happen, I will in some ways try to use that, them saying, as like a seal of guarantee that this will happen, understanding fully that they of course not infallible. I will use the beans that have been given to that reading and hang it around the icon of the saint that was part of the reading, or I will hang it around their idol or on the tree that I have for them, and be like, remember when you said this? You know, I need this to work. You said I would get this position. I need to get this position. So I would use that in workings, rituals for actually manifesting this as a kind of boost, being like, hey, like, there's already some kind of weight in the future. Some chain of transmission has agreed that this will work for me. So let's try and make that happen now. I'm not going to, unless the divination literally says, do not try and influence this further. You know, we've all had situations in which we see a reading that we just know in our hearts that like looking at this too closely or putting too much pressure on something magic wise, you're saying, oh, I want to actually do work on this, and your spirit's just saying, no, too much pressure, even a feather's weight more could tip the balance. You need to let this take its natural course. Spirits are already influencing the situation, including the person that you're working on, or not being advised not to work on. Spirits are already influencing things a certain way. Putting too much pressure is going to make their spirits go into defense mode, where they have to protect this person against the pathogen that is your magic, as opposed to just, and now they're going to start, doubting themselves and the decision that you already wanted them to make that was going to be natural to them. No, just let them do it. Just let them do it. And that way, you're not going to have a situation where the spirit's like, wait a second, maybe don't do that because someone else is trying to influence you to do this. And is that really your choice now? Your ancestors that you're praying for them in church are suddenly all like, why is this happening? Unless you want to get into one of those situations where you have to outmaneuver their ancestors and spirits for them, it's better to take a pause.
Definitely. I think that all comes into the idea of clarity, right? And awareness. What are you doing when you're divining? You're building an awareness. That isn't just about the topic at hand. It's also about everything that's might be related to the subject, right? Or related to the divination itself, related to the patient, related to ourselves. Like you might come in asking, hey, is he going to get the job? And instead of that, the spirits are like, no, that's not important right now. What's important is the fact that this man is drink driving every Friday night on his way home from his
He's
current
drink
job.
driving, not drunk driving.
Like, I mean,
He's actively drinking.
yeah,
Yeah.
man's
Party
guzzling a
has
bottle
not
of.
ended.
Yeah, the party has not ended. He's taking it all the way home. Yeah, no, I hear you.
But it's important to be aware of these things. And when you go to ask one question, it's like, okay, hold on, not that, no. Okay, listen, this man is gonna have a car crash next week if he doesn't sort his shit out. And like you look at the stars at that time, you look at the moon, you see, she's with Mars. You just kind of have to share that, and which is uncomfortable, right? You don't want to set it. So that question you asked, forget about it. We're gonna have to talk about this instead. It's just a very awkward situation to be in. It's kind of like Swinger brought up the idea of the chosen ones, right? People that kind of come seeking validation, or like they want to be told that they're very special in some way. Well, you know what? I feel really bad for the people who definitely didn't want that and were told there is something going on. And it's just like, that's also the cause of a lot of your issues, is that there's a particular fate going on, and that's why your health is like this and so on, which can happen in some traditions, right? And it's a situation that you're not actively seeking it. You don't want to be the chosen one, so to speak. You don't want to have a particular fate, but you do anyway, and you got to deal with it. Yeah, awareness I think is key in general.
I love that so much. Because that was the thing, is like that actually is something that kickstarted my and Key's friendship. Back when we met was like he wasn't asking for a divination necessarily, but he started sharing some like omens of his birth and other things relating to something that I'm very familiar with in terms of like what that could mean in my culture. And I was like, oh shit, we got to have a talk about this. Like if you ever ask me for divination about this, it's going to come up. This thing is going to 100% come up.
Yeah, that was a very fun evening. I was like, wait a minute, you mean to tell me that a shrimp fried this rice? And that whole matter of kind of the spirit interjected diagnosis reminded me of a story you told me recently, Svingo, where there was like a documentary of a particular healer who was like, don't even come in here. Like go to the doctor, don't come to me.
Yeah.
And it turned out that person like had some serious health problems going on. So it was like, oh wait, hold on a minute.
Something similar happened. My dad actually told me this recently. He was talking about this one professor friend of his who lives in Belgrade, and he is, a staunch atheist, very much dialectical materialist, as most good Yugoslav communists are. And he was saying like, oh, his friend for years have been trying to take him to this one diviner who reads beans in the east of the country. Like for years they've been trying to get him to visit her, and finally he was like, okay, fine, I'll go. But it's gonna be some random grandma in a village who's gonna read my corn or my coffee beans, whatever, fine. And they go over there. He opens the door to her house, and they knock, and it's unlocked, and he goes in. She's sitting at her coffee table, and she just looks at him and goes, oh no, like he doesn't even say hello, doesn't know like it's Zdravo, nothing like that. She just goes like, oh no, don't bother coming in, just go to the doctor. And he's like, what? She's like, yeah, just go to the doctor, check for colon cancer. And he's like, what? And so they literally kicked him out of her house. So they weren't allowed to go in, not going to, bust into this lady's house. So he goes back all the way back to Belgrade and goes to the hospital, gets a scan, and wouldn't you know it, stage 1 colon cancer, right? Now it's much, obviously they managed to catch it early, so it's fine. But that just made me laugh. It's like, don't even bother. Like that. I mean, that was a divination still. Even if it was like purely a spiritual message that was given to her psychically as an impression or as a message from her spirits, it was still technically a divination in the sense that it was spirit communication, right? Like necromancy is as asking the dead for questions. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be through a particular medium. But I just love that it was like, no. Catch this soon. Come back later.
Yeah, right. So when not to divine, it's when the spirit is screaming at you, tell this to this guy and leave, get him to go away.
Literally, yeah. Speaking of which, I would love to ask you guys, what are the methods that you are drawn to the most in your practice? Because we've tried it all. We've all done various kinds of things throughout our lives. I would say for myself, beans, obviously, favomensi, kumalek, gledanyu pasu, all these different terms, right? The 41 beans in 3x3 chart, that's my main. And I've studied many different kinds of it, and I absolutely love it. And it's definitely my favorite. It's very popular in the Balkans. It's not esoteric or secret or particularly special in the sense that, only the chosen can learn this. You can see this on ads in magazines for, people put out classifieds saying that they will read your beans. It's definitely my favorite, and I absolutely love using it. I've done plenty of tarot and Lenormand and playing cards. Found that playing cards out of the 3 were the ones that spoke to me the most. And I still read to this day with the Gypsy Oracle card deck that I mentioned, the German one that became really popular, as every Roma and Gypsy identifying person that I know, including the ones in my family, love this deck. Yes, because it's called Gypsy Oracle card deck. And also because, it has the language prints, obviously make it very cheap and easy to afford, like $3 online. So it's definitely something that we use. I do read as well in Kimanda with carries. Not something I'll do publicly for clients, but it is something that I've been trained to do, and I'm still very much an apprentice in that. It's a lifelong journey, as all these systems are, but that's something that I'm learning very slowly and very deliberately under the guidance of my tata. So it's not something I'm going to be giving as a method for others, at least not now. But in that way, I think it is good to note as well just the prevalence of auguries. So much of my divination day to day is auguries in terms of birds and seeing how many are flying up ahead, what kinds of birds, where the wind comes from, the gusts that comes from the southeast versus the north. I do a lot of wind and cloud divination because a lot of my spirits speak in weather phenomena. So this is a matter of like, what did they speak in? Did they speak in literally what did the 2 crows that constantly visit my backyard every day because of a particular spirit, what did they bring? Like recently there's a brown paper bag that one of them dropped into our backyard, that kind of stuff. What did they bring? What is happening? Because obviously spirits are going to communicate in a wide range of phenomena in the natural world. And how do you make sure that you're not overinterpreting random things to the point that, you become paralyzed, that you can't go outside because every single thing becomes a message? To me, it is the bodily feeling. There's a certain shift. The world changes and shimmers a little bit when I have this strong sense that there's a meaning here. There's something here that is not random. Not that everything is truly without meaning in the sense that some things are not for me. Some things are birds communicating with each other because they're trying to have sex, and it's nothing to do with me. No, I don't want to become a solipsist where absolutely every single thing that happens outside has to do with me. I'm not that kind of person. A lot of occultists suffer from main character syndrome, right? Where absolutely everything has to do with them. And I'm not interested in engaging in that kind of solipsism. However, there are times when I just feel the shimmer, the kind of the tingle up my spine, if you will. Certain feelings, we mentioned this before in the scrying episode. I keep referring to it because a lot of this builds off of that, right? In terms of, oh, it's this weird feeling in my gut. Oh, it's this nausea in my head. Oh, it's burning sensation behind my eyes. I know one of my spirits is here in some capacity. They're trying to communicate to me on some level. And I don't 100% know where they're coming from or what they're trying to say. So let me see what they're using to communicate with me. And that's like, I'm just drawn to the sky and I see the clouds and I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense for the spirit. So nature auguries, I would say, are a huge part of my witchcraft. And I have ways to check in at home or with other tools to see that I accurately understand that. Kind of checking the divination within their divination in a sense of like, a quick yes/no check with spirits, like did I get that right? Was that an accurate interpretation? great. I can always go into it more at home, but I can get a lot out of the way the leaves blow, you know.
Yeah, I think there's a great deal of power in the augury as almost a distilled essence of a spirit manifesting in a particular way that is just like, and it's been done for, all of history. This is kind of one of the main methods of divination up until very recently, and I think it's does a lot of good for people to cultivate that in their own particular way, to learn, be like, how do my spirits interact with the natural world? Because it also allows you to understand how their magic manifests, how they operate within the world, what their feelings, affects, emotions, the way that they occupy a room can even be, and some cool stuff. Some big vibe. So, of course, I'm a talk to the animals enjoyer.
Yes, talk to the crows, talk to the
Mhm.
ravens, talk to the squirrels.
The crows, the ravens, of course, from such a silly spirit being involved in that thing. Speaking with the bees is another big one.
We're gonna do an episode on this, by the way, and it's coming up shorter. I know when we say like, oh, just gonna be an episode on this, that could mean in 20, but like this one is coming up shortly. I can promise you that.
Definitely, yeah. Then I guess of more, contemporarily utilized divination systems, I like to go with Lenormand playing cards, Geomancy. Definitely love me some Geomancy. Very fun time, and having the spirits that kind of rule over that art and be like, okay, you need to go meet the angel that rules over this particular geomantic figure. So if they're like, oh, you need to go meet the angel of Latitia on this day, you need to go meet the daimon of Latitia on its birth, like of its own nativity for its own sake. Like what happens when you need to meet with, Puer, for example, and you're dragged into like a vision sequence of being in the Garden of Eden and flies upon a fruit on the ground that's now decomposing but still contains the essence of the first man within it, forming the figure. I don't know, the way I fuck around with geomancy gets a little weird, but I think allowing the spirits to lead where it leads and allowing for interpretation on that level, some good shit. Then I have a pocket pick that I must invoke as a upcoming thing that will potentially be sold out through the blog for specifically weather augury and omens, the storm glass.
Yes, please tell us all about this. Like I have been obsessed with, as a weather magic enjoyer, certified freak 7 days a week. This is 100% something that I love that you do. Yeah, hit us with it.
Okay, so the storm glass itself is a early attempt by chemists to predict the weather. The form of this, and if you just search on Google or whatever, storm glass or chemical weather glass, the Wikipedia page is actually pretty good for it. It has a lot of photo examples. There's a YouTube channel that I think is called Nighthawk and Light that actually has a very detailed tutorial for how to make one. But the TLDR is these things were popularized by the British Royal Navy in the 1860s after a particular admiral swore up and down by their efficacy and accuracy in predicting the weather to the point that he was able to maneuver his fleet that he commanded at the time using these apparatuses. As for what they actually are in like form and function, they're a glass vessel. It's not like hermetically sealed, but it is sealed in the sense of like a lid is put on it that's full of distilled water, ethanol, potassium nitrate, ammonium chlorate, and camphor. The actual ratios of those are escaping me right now, but those are the ingredients. If you can get ammonium chloride on Amazon, potassium nitrate you can get at most hardware or garden supply stores. Camphor you can also get on anywhere on the internet. But the idea is that the temperature and the barometric pressure cause the precipitation and recrystallization of the salts to give omens for what the weather will be, as it were. So if the liquid in the glass is clear, the weather on that day is supposed to be clear, bright sun, not too much wind. If the liquid is cloudy, the weather gets cloudy with the possibility of rain. If the glass has clouds in it, but there are small nucleations of star-like crystals floating along the top, that means thunderstorms are inclement. If the liquid has stars but is clear, especially in the winter, that means snow is coming. There's this whole highly categorized and defined list of omens. And these things actually are pretty decent, especially once you start jujuing the hell out of them to get more and more accurate and to spawn more appropriate omens where the spirits can influence the vapors and the humors itself of this particular apparatus.
I'm obsessed. First of all, obsessed that you thought to use this as your divination tool, and actually you've had some pretty incredible results with it too. What was the one? Please elaborate on this because I don't 100% remember the circumstance of it. But wasn't there a case where you got like a hailstone or something like that to manifest because of this?
Yeah, so part of what I do to mess around with it is I induce specific temperature changes to it, usually with like pot of boiling water, very classic, throw the pot on the stove, start doing oral charms into the water, doing all sorts of stuff to it, whacking it with branches of trees and whisks and spoons and ladles and things. But then very carefully running it through this stage of temperature changes to bring about state that I want to see in the glass. So, and of course, the temperature in the sealed vessel affects the pressure. So we're going with that whole thing. Ideal gas law for any other nerds out there who took an intro to chemistry class. But
King.
the bringing about a state that generated a thunderstorm in kind of that very, very, very dogmatic classic sympathy of being the state of this will be reflected in the state of the world. And I was like, fuck it, I just want to see if it works. And after some fiddling around with it, it did, and it brought a thunderstorm with hail to the city.
Oh
which
my
made me
God.
very happy.
I love that. You know my feelings on weather magic and it being such a great way to prove to yourself that magic is real and that your spirits can do large scale change. I'm something of a weather magic specialist in terms of my private life. I do a lot of it for various fertility reasons. And yeah, absolutely obsessed. So I'm very glad to see you hopping on that because that is freaking awesome. And you're also a geomancer. Like you like the geomancy.
Yes.
You like all of that stuff. But I love that you and I can bond over the weather omens. That's freaking awesome. And so I want to hear more about incense because we buy these huge 1,000 incense packs from various different places in Chinatown, often in the section of a lot of those kind of convenience, all general purpose stores, you'll have a funeral section that if you don't really know what that is, you won't realize it's for funerals, but they'll have the ghost outfits that you can give to your ancestors. They'll have all the paper-made gold ingots and plenty of incense burners and things, statues of different spirits, and plenty of little red candles for cheap, which obviously are very useful to me. And Salt tends to get his huge packs of incense there, and he goes through it fast. Like I'm out here working with my sticks. I always love the Morningstar Japanese brand to give to my spirits.
Yes.
I've been giving them musk and all those wonderful scents from there, and jasmine and orchids and everything. And then Salt's just going through this cheap incense by the hundreds, and I know he's doing lots of divination with it. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that, and then tell us all about astrology.
Yeah, so when it comes to burning incense, there's two ways you can go about it, really. There's the secular way, or kind of the knowledge agnostic way, where you have a set of techniques and any spirit that you're working with can kind of give you answers through it. And actually, I've left a little something about that in the almanac issues. The way I do it's a little bit different, similar in terms of technique, perhaps to a degree, but this is from a tradition from northern China known as the Immortal Family, which is based on the veneration of 5, sometimes 4 families of quasi-saints. It's basically a folk religion. People aren't always the fondest of it in China. It's the standard issue that folk religion faces in most countries, I think. But essentially, the divination system's done by consulting with these 5 different families of immortals: the Hu family, the Yellow family, who are weasels, but you don't call them that; the Python family, sometimes they're called Willow, sometimes they're called Chang. You also have the White family, which are the hedgehogs usually, sometimes rabbits, but I haven't really seen that. And then you have the Grey family, or Quay family, Ash, Grey, which are mice and rats. And essentially these are kind of quasi-saints, or sometimes people say mountain spirits. This has also been adapted, like there's a lot of Taoist terms that have been adapted, so generally we refer to them as earth immortals, which is kind of they've attained immortality, but they haven't quite completed the process yet, and they come down to possess people. They come down to attain merit, basically to help people and in return receive rewards so that their cultivation can grow, so that they can ascend to heaven essentially and become heaven immortals. and they operate under a very strict hierarchy. We're going to talk more about this perhaps one day. That's maybe. It's not necessarily something I'm too keen on talking about, at least not yet. I have a lot of work to do there myself. Suffice to say, it is a fairly intensive practice. And incense in this context, it's one of the main divination tools. I mean, it's one of the ways you look to see if someone has like foxes or weasels, which we shouldn't be calling them, right? We should be calling them who and yellow. But I'm going to say that way just to make it easier for people here. You would use incense to check to see if these are on this person's body, to see if they have the traits, if they have the fate with those particular immortals, and if they're moving them, if they're possessing them. And sometimes that possession is bad. In fact, for most people, it's very difficult, but it's kind of necessary to have a handle on that. So yeah, as far as incense divination, it's kind of one of the main ways in which they communicate what we were just saying earlier about sending the soldiers down from the mountains, gathering them, sending them out to investigate, to protect, to purify. All these kind of techniques come into play during that. So it's a very involved practice. A lot of people have adapted Manchurian practices, although that's not really the original, even if it's kind of popular to claim that they originated in Manchurian practices. Mostly Han Chinese appropriating that.
Speaking of which, is a great book on Northern Chinese practices that came out from David Shi that I just wanted to plug briefly. It's called Spirit Voices, The Mysteries and Magic of North Asian Shamanism. And that's one that I've been going through lately. Also, really, really good stuff on a lot of those traditions that you're talking about. And also, I just find whenever you talk about Shimashian, it's always with such love and admiration for that tradition. And I know it's inspired how you've been learning to speak and read Mandarin. And yeah, it's absolutely lovely. I think that reading yes and no through incense into the way that it spirals up or the way that it moves, and also just diagnosing the tendency of certain spirits and certain lineages to be upon a person is one of those things where like it's always exciting to know what spirits are around you, but the problem is like once you do, now you have to tend to them. So this is why I advise against going to receive too many readings on like, are these spirits on me, or getting a reading in different systems and being like, what is my patron in this system? It's like, well, now they know that you know who they are, so they're going to be involved in your life and want veneration and want attention. So be very careful about collecting. I mean, I always advise against collecting spirits, right? But it's definitely something that I think you should be especially careful about with regards to these techniques. So, hearing that and it's really cool. And it's just like, oh, I wonder what aspects of the immortal family around me. It's like, no, well, actually, do I have time to deal with the consequences of if the answer is actually a lot and now they're gonna make it so that you can't hold a normal job and you have to become a medium full time? Like, wait, that's gonna change a lot, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that is what they do. Like, that's one of the reasons their reputation is quite difficult, is
Yeah.
that they will come down and they will just straight up, okay, listen, you're not a very good medium at the moment, so we're gonna fuck your body up so that we can fit inside and possess you. Oh, and by the way, once this is all done, we are gonna make sure that you can't get regular work, and we're gonna make sure that you are a full-time diviner for us. And if you have someone that comes to you, you can't turn them down, because now we can't get the merits that we receive. And in exchange, of course, we'll help make sure you have a livelihood for your divination. Like, that is genuinely something that will happen with some folks. I mean, the particular relationship differs, right? And not everyone has them. It's a matter of Xianwan or immortal fate, which is essentially, are you fated to have that relationship with them? Anyone can have, or at least generally, there's a lot of debate over this as well. It's folk religion, right? But in some cases, people think, yeah, everyone has Bao Jixian, or like family guardian immortals, which anyone can pray to, anyone can venerate, usually Hu and Huang. But as far as like actively engaging in mediumship, generally speaking, it's kind of presumed that there's a particular relationship that has to exist. And sometimes that can come about naturally, like over time. Sometimes it's kind of predetermined, depends on the person. Also, your ancestral line often has a massive role to play in that as well. But yeah, in general, like this kind of, like you said, like shopping around for divination, like it's not necessarily what you want to do. It's people come looking for legitimacy. They want to hear someone confirm what they think so that they can say, hey, look, this guy said it, so I must be the real deal. Usually, unless it's, entrance into a tradition where it's required, say an initiatory lineage where you have to have a divination of who your spirits are, it's not necessarily what you want. You don't want a billion different spirits from a billion different systems clamming around arguing for attention, and there's no saying that they're all going to get along, or if their taboos are wildly different. Hey, I'm a vegetarian spirit, so if there's any blood in the shrine room, I will throw a tantrum because I am not having that. And then
Yeah.
You got spirits that are just like blood. I want more
Literally both in witchcraft and in Africa traditional religions, right? So it's one of those things where we mentioned this before, but we keep our shrines very separate. Like mine, like there's a lot that stay in the general shrine room that are mine, that are certain spirits that are very comfortable with those purity taboos that yours mandate, and then the ones that absolutely do receive blood are going to be elsewhere in a completely different floor of the house. But yeah, definitely a good thing. And it's just fascinating. It's not, I give incense a lot as an offering. I give daily incense offerings to all the spirits in our house with my certified, Morning Star. I'm such a simp for Morning Star incense. I just love the way it burns. Key, I know you do too.
I love the Morning Star X Naruto Goku incense most
Oh
of
my
all.
God.
It provides an incredible amount of power when offered to the spirits.
Okay, I've totally seen those. I've seen that in actual stores I've been to when I was just being a filthy weeb and I wanted to get the latest manga volume of a particular series that I follow. I've seen those out in the front next to all those like gacha games where you can get like a blind box with a little figurine. And I was like, oh my God, it's the Goku incense. And then I've also seen that in like actual like straight up candle shops. I would hesitate to call them botanicas because they don't actually sell fresh herbs. And to have Botanica by nature is going to have fresh herbs to serve the ATR community that's going to be needing them for initiations and things, but they're going to call themselves Botanicas anyway, even if they're just selling dried herbs, right? But the ones that I go to, the candle shops, the Herbarías, as you will, they often have it in stock, and I've always kind of had a little bit of a giggle about it, especially as I think Dragon Ball Z was something that I saw in Serbian as a kid, and I thought it was a Serbian show because it was dubbed, and then when I moved to Canada, I was like, oh my God, it's literally it's literally Japanese that was then dubbed into English and then it got dubbed into Serbian. That's how that works. It makes sense now. Pokemon is also not actually Serbian. But yeah, anyway, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing a bit more about this stuff. I hope one day you'll be comfortable doing a Chimashan episode.
Maybe, yeah, we'll see.
We'll see, yeah.
But a more pressing question to my mind is, what kind of power levels do you get from burning a Goku incense?
Oh gosh, not over 9,000. Certainly, I think it's a little under that, but we'll maybe we'll get the smoke to manifest number. We should try that at some point. See which one of our spirits is a jokester.
You get like 1 power level per stick burn,
oh God,
which is how they trick you into burning more.
Oh God, it's like when you do like anyone who's like, oh, I want to buy a Thai amulet or something like that, and then you get the instructions and it's just like burn this many incense sticks when it comes, and you're like, yeah, that's right. It's same with collecting spirits, right? On that notion, like be careful with buying too many things. You got to take care of like the marriage of consumerism and spirituality, but a topic for another time. In the meanwhile, I don't want to keep you on for too long, but I thought we would go Salt. I want to kind of talk about when do you know that you're ready to start providing readings? Might be an interesting question to go into for others, not just for yourself. I have a very short answer, which is I wait until I practice the system for at least 3 years and have had the mentors who pass that on to me check it. If I learned it myself, if I was just an autodidact about it through books, and then I go to the people that I trust the most and I'm like, can I read for you? And we'll see, have I gotten a hold on the kind of light trance I need to be in sufficiently, that kind of mantic element of being able to divine. Is it accurate? Can I do it for many different questions? Can I find where someone's wallet is? Usual kind of folk magic stuff. And then at the same time, can I do broader scale things? It's sometimes you get forced by your spirits to do it earlier to give you confidence because you need the money, frankly, and they're like, this is a way you can make the money. And I have plenty of friends who've been in that situation. But in my case, I take it very seriously that I need to be very, very, very well practiced before I'm ever comfortable offering it. So I'll do a lot of free ones for people and kind of practice, but ultimately, if I'm going to start charging for something, I need to be all the people that I really trust and whose opinions and judgments and abilities I value need to have given me the go.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
What about you? I was just going to say, like, how about you? Like, how did you get started with astrology? Like, what's a good way to kind of, I know you have a lot of thoughts as to what you believe is necessary to keep in mind if you're going to be doing horary and natal astrology and certainly elections, but can you give us a little bit of an idea as to how you got started? Because when we started dating, actually, you were not the astro mage extraordinaire that you currently are. So I'm very curious as to I saw in like real life, firsthand, you go into obsessive research and incredible levels of testing your predictive abilities until you became the superstar that you are today. So I'd love for you to illuminate for our listeners how that happened for you.
Yeah, so I think in my case, it was very much a matter of being forced by the spirits. Sometimes spirits like to press you into things. It's not really a matter of yes, no, and so on. And in this case, that was one of the skills that they basically forced me to start practicing. They've just kind of appeared and were like, okay, you've started learning this for a little while now. You don't really have a choice. You're going to be doing this for a while. I think in general, I wouldn't have gotten to where I was if I didn't start. I think many astrologers do, because astrology is such a broad and difficult subject to kind of wrap your head around, especially to begin with. It is only by actively engaging with clients, actively answering questions, and feeling the pressure from that as well. Like the pressure from that will get your ass into gear. It's kind of like, okay, there's all these different factors, there's all these little components, and you have to address them. You have to kind of get familiar with them. And the only way to do that is by practice. But in the ideal situation where you're not forced into that, I would honestly say about 3 years. And the last year of that should be doing it for free, because you are practicing, you are training, and you should be doing it on the daily to the quantity that you would be paid for. Now, saying should sounds very strong here. This isn't you must do this. This is just a recommendation that I have. If you want to pursue this in a way that isn't going to be a bit awkward, as it was in my case, because astrology is a very complicated system of divination. It's not as easy to grasp as a lot of others are. And even though there are other systems of divination that are as complicated, there aren't as many of them that present so much information as abruptly. By which I mean, when someone who doesn't know astrology looks at a chart, assuming we're talking about traditional astrology, they see 7 symbols, they see 12 houses, and they see 12 signs. And it's probably whole sign, so they just see 12 signs and houses at the same time. There's only so much it can come from that, and obviously there's a lot of configurations. Okay, now let's talk about fixed stars. Let's talk about Piranha. So let's talk about this star. What kind of aspect is it making? And not just aspects, what kind of solar phase is the star having? Like, is it Eastern direct? Is it Eastern retrograde? Is it making as a chronicle rising or Western retrograde? Is he Western direct? Is he making a setting? Is he under the beams? Is he making a rising? Is he conjunct with the sun and so-called Kazemi, or in the heart of the sun? Like, these are all life cycles for the planet. It's the same. Is he above the horizon? Is he under the horizon? Is he in a male or female sign? What kind of stars is he with? Is he with stars that are part of the same sect? Is there a reception between them? Is there a non-reception between them where, they're in signs that they hate and their ruler is looking at them and he's just like, yeah, we don't get on that well, which is kind of like a rejection, right? Because when you're staying in someone's house and the person in question really doesn't like you, that's not a fun experience. And well, that's what rejection and reception is. Like, there's all these little factors, and it's a lot. Like, this is a lot. So I think 3 years is a very good time frame. It's quite reasonable to expect that, but it also means because there's all of this going on, you need to really grind the practice of it. And that's why in my case, right, I probably wouldn't have grinded without having the pressure of doing well for my clients. I think that was a massive part of it, to be honest, was just, okay, I've got to do this well. I've got to do right by my clients. I've got to make this as useful as possible, as helpful as possible, and it has to be technically right. So I did have a grasp, it wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm just making shit up. Like, I had a pretty decent grasp. It was just a simple one, and simple was sometimes fine. But if you want to get to the real meat and bones of astrology, it's not just, hey, this planet in this house in this sign, like that's, making these aspects. So that's the 101 stuff. Like, you need to make use of chronocrator techniques. You need to know, what's the revolution looking like in this year? Or at the very least, you need to be able to look at that, like, if you need to. Same with the primary directions or ascensional times, however you want to use them. I fucking love that as a technique. Zodiacal releasing is gaining popularity, and I think that's great. I think it's a genuinely amazing method. There's just all these little methods along the way that you kind of pick up and develop. And as you grow and work with all of them, you start to develop a deeper understanding. You should never limit yourself to just one period or one source text. I know some folks say I should focus on one source. I don't see Valens doing that when he starts on Chepsa and Petasaurus. He starts Critidamus as well. He's throwing his own thoughts into the mix. It's don't limit yourself to one astrologer. Don't limit yourself to one source, one method. Become familiar with as much as you can. Engage with as much material as you can. And use that to build a foundation from which you can kind of just develop your practice however it has to go, Frankenstein it. Because you will learn from every single one of these authors. You'll learn from every single one of these sources, and by them, you'll be able to build a cohesive picture. Along the way, you also want to look at, the worldview underlying everything. The way Abhimashar talks is Aristotelian, for example, and it's very distinct from writers like Valens, who are perhaps more influenced by Stoic thought. And a Christian astrologers really, really want to make sure that free will is present in astrology. And that continues today. It's an obsession, especially of magicians. People are scared to lose control. They're scared to accept challenges to freedom of choice. Astrology is difficult. It isn't just about you. It reflects the whole cosmos. And the world is difficult. There are hardships. And that's why astrology is so negative, right? It's why it's so difficult a lot of the time. That doesn't mean you should be negative when you're giving readings necessarily. I think there's a time and a place for that. But it does show, like, every single struggle this individual is going through is in this chart. There is nothing not written in there, in my opinion. Astrology is a divination system that reflects the literal cosmos, the world itself. It's going to incorporate a lot of these components.
Beautifully said. And I'm really glad you summarized so much, because often people, what puts them off is the idea that it's very negative, but I think it's also why people make all kinds of talismans, right? To try and boost certain things in their lives, to try and cultivate certain virtues. I also think that it's part of the reason why it's good to just know things. Like, I'd rather, like that guy who went to that village and was told, just go back to the doctor. It's better to know. So on the one hand, the balance between not over divining and being too paralyzed to do anything, because of course there's always a chance something can go wrong, and accepting that your spirits aren't necessarily infallible. Things can go wrong. This is the greatest surgeon in the world still has someone die at their operating table. The most incredible lawyer in the world still loses cases. It's also just important to know to have a balanced, kind of healthy relationship with spirits and with the accruement of knowledge in your own practice, and the ability to just let things be at times. If you can't talk to a single person without trying to do some kind of glamour on them, then at that point, I think it says a lot more about you than it says about anything about them. It also just leads to a sense of not being able to engage in any way. Now, of course, a lot of us, because we're surrounded by spirits and talismans and amulets and all manner of things, we're going to naturally exude certain luck drawing things and certain glamours. And that's one thing. I'm not saying you have to pare all that down. I'm just saying it's like an active kind of enchantment of a person that you might do intentionally for a boss because you want to get a good job interview experience. That's great, but to do that in every single space, it's one thing to take a talisman with you to help shine and kind of stand out a little bit. It's another thing to be actively writing down people's names.
No, genuinely. And I think that's also important in the context of astrology, right? Because I'm not going to dispute whether remediation is possible. I think that's something that's very much worth discussing in detail. But a lot of takes are like, hey, I can keep a planet. I can just completely erase this. Like, this is the literal cosmological force. This is the physical manifestation, or, the closest of a physical manifestation that a deity could take. Like, this is the messenger in chief, so to speak. This is the prime soul in the universe, because deities are above soul within the. So it's a very strong and very bold claim to overcome the planets in that way. And also, to change their mind. I think a lot of people present it that way, but I'd like to see them make the star Mars in the sky disappear. I think it's definitely something that can be addressed. Is difficulties in the chart using practice, but how far that goes, I think, is very much a difficult question that's really worth investigating and discussing. And I don't think people on either side of the debate will ever come to a conclusion, and that's fine. But yeah, I think it's very interesting, like the individualism that kind of comes into this whole idea and this whole notion of trying to set one's personal ideals or will over the heavens. Is a very Protestant interpretation, in fact. I mean, it's Christian in general, right? But
I mean, not, listen, for my fellow witches out there, hear me out, okay? Not everyone is Medea and can pull down the moon. Some can, but not everyone. So be humble and know which one you are. We've all seen miracles happen in our practices in many traditions, and sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. And even going down to the PGM, can you coerce or can you conjure? Can you persuade? Do you have certain spirit contacts that can do certain things for you and move even the heavens? All right. And is that necessary? And what are the consequences of those things? I think the Oracle of Kronos charm is a good example of just the kinds of consequences that can happen with that kind of attempt to move the gods.
Truly.
So, Key, What are your thoughts? I realize we went a little long-winded, but I know you had an idea to share about when you're ready to start reading.
So just to briefly address what you guys got into there, I think that it's all very well said, not hardly long-winded at all. In fact, spawning multiple episodes out of that very conversation is possible should we go down the road. But
Woohoo!
the very careful balance and kind of the knowing of oneself and one's own capabilities when, looking at a given fate and being like, okay, these events will occur in life, and what can we do about it magically? If we are afflicted in a great way, it's like, well, can we do anything about that influence? I don't know, maybe. And with cultivation of magical ability, we overcome more and more of those. But it's the classic question of like, well, if we're magicians, do we have free will? And my favorite answer, of course, of all time comes from like conjure workers or like jinn magicians in equal measure, which is, it is permitted by God, so I'm doing it anyways.
Oh yeah, I've seen that so many times with interviews with jinn sorcerers where it's like, well, Allah could stop this.
Yeah, right.
Like this could easily be completely overdone by his grace, and so if it's not happening, then that means it's permitted.
Exactly. And like hearing these old conjure doctors, I'm like, you just got like really nasty with that curse. And it's like, well, God didn't stop it. There was no intercession. And I'm like, you know what? That's pretty cool. But yeah, so regards to God not stopping things and jinn sorcery, there is, of course, the question that is endlessly debated in forums online of if Arabic or Islamic geomancy, ilm al-ramal, forgive my pronunciation for that, if it is permitted or not, as a still to this day broadly utilized cultural practice. And I'm like, oh God, this is Chinese rights controversy all over again. But with the regards to the question of how do you know when to start providing readings, I have been looking for it for this past hour online and was unable to find it. So I'll put it in the show notes if I'm able to track it down again. But there was this diviner who had a blog that I was briefly obsessed with because she was a geomancer who was in a particular school of interpretation preserved by a family lineage that was incredibly strict. So members of the family or students who were brought into the family had to be initiated before they could even read the various lineage, guardians, diviners, spirits, and brought into this, matrix of pacts that have been cultivated over generations, angels, jinn, shayateen, the various figures themselves, this whole thing happening, which very cool. But before
That is
they could,
so cool.
and before they could offer their services professionally, the students and the apprentices would have to sit down with their mentors and they would be asked a battery of 100 questions and to be given the license to read in a professional capacity, they had to answer all of the 100 questions correctly. And the events had to be verified to come to pass. And this is, of course, the broad array. It's like, this couple, will they get married? In the event of their marriage, how will their marriage go? How is the stock market going to go? Is this company going to succeed or fail? Is this lost object going to be found within this time frame? What are we doing with the cattle? What's the weather like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And although this 100 questions is like a huge number, that is kind of a standard where I'm like, oh, damn, I kind of fuck with that, which of kind of the three of us is why, as evidenced by our blog, I'm the most reticent to offer divinatory services in a public capacity. Because I'm like, just for my own trust in the medicine that I dispense, because that is definitely what we're doing as diviners. We're dispensing medicine to the soul. I'm like, I kind of want to finish pharmacy school first.
That is such a cool story. If you do find the source, please do send it to me and then also include it in the show notes. But even so, I think that There's something to that. I don't want to scare people off from feeling like they shouldn't divine unless they've done that. On the other hand, maybe it's good to be a little cautious. Maybe it's good to think about the practice of this family, because on the one hand, there are always going to be stricter and looser standards, and we should endeavor to always be humble and patient before the people who teach us these things. If you're self-taught through books, you're still engaging with a world of spirits to divine these answers. It's not just random shuffling cards, right? Like it's some kind of poker deck. You're asking the spirits to put you in the trance in which you can not only interpret the signs, not that you're reading from a little white book, but you're actually interpreting, but also to the point that your hands cut the deck and pulled the cards at the precise moment. So in the case of cartomancy, I fan mine out and have my left hand go over them like a pendulum until it feels this inescapable weight that will draw that one card that it falls over. And if it's a little bit, muddy because they're stuck together, like I'll separate those and do it all over again until I feel it's this card. So it's one of those things of, I think, speaking to lineage guardians and the mentors that pass these things down to us, it's important to keep understanding that skill and proficiency in divination is going to carry over, but it doesn't mean that you being an incredible, let's say, geomancer means that you're going to be phenomenal at some other system immediately and that you can start offering it at the same time. So I like the idea of having to prove your worth. It's something that I certainly will ask my mentors to certify me and to give me their permission, their license to say, like, I feel comfortable as someone who trained you going out into the world, passing this on. I did that with beans well before I ever considered offering it publicly as something that I could do. I had everyone who ever taught it to me tell me, here's these questions. It wasn't 100, but it was definitely like, here's these questions, answer these things in this order. And I had to get it all right. On the other hand, I do like the idea that actually we should be cautious. We should be ballsy. We should be, adventurous. There's a bit of arrogance behind every witch and magician that is important to remember. But there's also the need to, as you said, dispense the medicine to the souls of our clients. And we want to do a good job for them. And so I think with that said, something that maybe we could end off on is, how do you communicate to clients to ensure that the messages they may be resistant or reticent to accept are still communicated effectively? Because I think about this a lot, and I used to do written readings. I'm very glad I do oral ones now, because I find that the dialogue helps a lot. My writing style can be very formal, and so I found that sometimes that would not necessarily always land with people. They might be a little bit confused or taken aback, or think that I'm being much more firm than when I'm trying to be a bit more open about things. So as much as I love writing, and I am someone who, has a whole other identity in which I write novels and fiction and short stories and, to great acclaim, which I'm very, very proud of. It's something that I realize with conveying these intimate things, I would say most people have always been able to understand what is going on. People who are extremely anxious are not going to read even something that you wrote beautifully and eloquently and very, very much over-explaining, which is a tendency to do, right? And you're not going to necessarily internalize it. So I find that oral readings are very helpful in that way. That said, I think ultimately, yes, you do want to give them an accurate answer. You do want them to say no when the answer is no. You don't want to shy away from telling them, I don't see this saying that I think you're confusing the spirit for another. I want you to feel empowered to not stripped of power. You don't want to make the client feel like, oh, then they're just a bad person, or they're just like deluded in some way. Not at all. This is not a matter of that. This is a matter of this can happen to all of us, and it will happen to all of us. And we want to give them the tools to seize and the real gifts and the things that are available to them without making them feel comfortable to go into kind of a sensitive sort of lunar lull of like, okay, well, like it's all, if you believe me that I have superpowers and invisible friends, I'll believe that you have superpowers and invisible friends. Like, no, we want to have an actual grounding and rootedness in our practices. As we kept mentioning in previous episodes, you want to make sure that your spirits are doing things for you. You want to make sure you're getting something out of this, that your offerings are not just being accepted, they're being worked. So in that case, I think, how do you give the medicine in a way that they'll be inclined to take it? You can tell them real visions that are happening, and, not that you're necessarily the authority in life if you're not the priest, but if they're paying for you, then in this moment, you are behaving as one, and to a certain extent. So, this may not click to them because it's not validating, and therefore it's not actionable to them because they don't agree with it. So I think finding ways, I don't believe in sugarcoating, but I do believe in being able to empower the person and make them understand, here is the good that will come out of coming to understand a situation. If they want to get back with somebody, for example, and it's not appropriate for them, it will not be a marriage or a relationship that will last. It will bring them more chaos and confusion, but they're so in love with this person, they just want to know, what is the working they do to make them come back? Do you just say, yeah, here is the working that will make them come back, and I'm not your boss, so you can do this, and I'm warning you, this will happen. It will manifest, it will succeed, you'll get back together, and it will be miserable in these ways. Your spirits might come forward and be like, but here's this other thing. Consider this. Consider what would happen if you took the hard road, if you took some time to build yourself. Consider the relationship that you'll find that will blow this out of the water. It'll just be an ugly memory in the past. And you will no longer be feeling like you have to constantly beg for affection or grovel for pieces of affirmation and reassurance and validation in your relationship. Rather, it can be something where that is organically a part of the day-to-day. So it's a matter of not just telling them what they want to hear, but reminding them of the medicine that is to come, and also giving them, at the end of the day, you have the priest, right? So they'll be, the consequences of their actions are solely their own. So they can be like, okay, I get that, but I'm still choosing this person. And great, okay, it's not your business. It's just, it's a client interaction, right? You're not their mentor, they're not your student. But at the same time, it's important to give those choices. So that's something I think about a lot in situations in which I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to deliver some news that this person is, I can tell from the moment of the inquiry, this is not what they were hoping to hear. This is definitely, and sometimes I'm skeptical of something and I'm like, oh, I don't really know what this is going to be turn out. And then I'm floored at the omens that show up and the visions that I receive. And I'm like, wow, this person has a lot more than they can fathom. Like they don't realize how deeply invested in the spirit they are, how deeply present this is, how much the spirit has been around for them since their childhood. And they, in fact, need me to kind of hammer this home because they won't believe it unless somebody else sees it. And in this case, like it's actually really important for me to make sure that they feel empowered to seize this experience in this relationship. Otherwise, they may never feel comfortable doing so because they're always going to doubt themselves and think, what if I'm deluded? What if it's wish fulfillment? So that's something that I think is an important balance to strike.
Definitely. Yeah. I think like to that point, we can dispense as much of the medicine that we can give as we want, but to accompany that medicine should be a good reason to take it.
Yeah.
And of course, in the example of like, here are the consequences of your actions, or here are the immense benefits, really hammering that into the client, being like, now that you have this information, you really need to do something with it in one direction or another. One of the classic problems that I think all three of us have run into, or have definitely run into, is being like, here is a good piece of advice, and the person's like, great, I will completely ignore it. Have a day, and it's like, come on, man. But then it's like the dispensation of that, and as we all hone our skills as diviners of being able to be like, okay, this person needs to fucking deal with this person needs to do this. How do I get them to take this advice? How do I get them to take this medicine? Then the consequences happen that we're like, okay, if you don't, this will happen. And it's like, damn, okay, cool.
Yeah. We're not licensed therapists.
Right.
We're not here we're not beholden to emotional tantrums that can come from these experiences. Fortunately, we've all been on the receiving end, well, like not salt, but we've been in situations where it obviously didn't go well, but at the same time, and we can just say, okay, cool, that was what you're able to get from me. So this is just a warning to people who are thinking of providing divination professionally. It will, when this occurs, don't be destroyed by it. Just remember that, okay, people, different maturity levels, different needs. You can just walk away from that. You can be like, nope, this is not something that I'm interested in. And I really just want our listeners who are considering doing divination professionally to not let the fear of these interactions preclude them from doing divination. It's just a matter of remembering that ultimately, you're responsible for your interactions and they're responsible for theirs. So let that be what it be. I have to say, I am incredibly blessed with so many incredible clients who are so wise that I learned so much from. And when I get anxious sometimes about something I'm about to see, this trance will pull me so hard, usually into not even worrying about all those kind of human interactions. And then I mediate it and have to come back because, again, you're not merely an oracle for a spirit, you're the translator. And things will get lost in translation. There's always things that come to me that I'm never going to tell the client because it's not information for them, it's information for me. There's always things that are going to come forward that I'm going to not expect to have to say, and that I do. And I learned so much from the amazing clients, especially my regulars and the people that I work with a lot, who come out humbling me with just their insights and their gravitas and their grace at being able to be like, yes, I was also worried this might be the case. And I feel so much more empowered now to make a choice that is more rooted in my authority and my agency, as opposed to one in which that I feel I kind of have to gravitate towards because of impulses. because that happens to us all. So again, don't want to make it too scary, just more to say, ultimately you walk away from this interactions as you please. But most people I would say that I've worked with have been exceptionally graceful and in fact incredibly validating these things of being like, no, I had a feeling that was the case. I just want to double check. Great, now I know to avoid the situation. I'm glad you pointed out and your spirits were able to articulate for me, this is not a good path to go down. This is not the job I should be applying for. Actually, I should spend some time doing this before I consider the next move in this relationship and so on.
Yeah, and I just really want to echo the sentiment of having really good clients, being really grateful for them, and having people come to me with questions that are even provocative for me as the person who's like supposed to guide them in a particular direction or share techniques and strategies with them. When they pop off with like some really interesting questions about spirit interactions, I'm like, that actually gave me pause. Let me think about that for a second.
Yeah,
And like,
yeah. When you're like, oh my God, that's so thoughtful and inquisitive about their spirits, and that's making me think about mine and my relationship with them. And I need to bring this up to them actually later on, not out of anxiety, but from a place of empowerment to be like, this is a great thing to explore.
Definitely, yeah. And sometimes I'm like, you know what? Let's explore that together right now, because that's a really interesting line of inquiry. Like that is superseding of whatever technique I could pass on to you in this moment. Like, let's work with that. And it's kind of the building of that rapport that I really like. It is the balm to the pretty strict standards that I put on my own divinatory practice, especially with clients, where I'm like, under the guise of like training people and working with their own spirit courts, like, of course I'm divining, of course I'm like scrying and shit and being like, this is what I see, here's the confirmation with like the divination that led me in this particular direction. But then kind of popping off in that way, it's like, okay, there's something going on here that is giving me feedback to the divination kind of in real time that I really appreciate.
Completely. Well, gentlemen, I think we've covered a lot, and I think very obviously, I know we've said this a few times, but we're just earmarking things to the future. This will definitely be a multi-part phenomena. We'll be bringing all kinds of divinatory experiences back. We'll do episodes on different styles of divination and our experiences with them. And since so many people asked us, both our patrons and our various listeners have reached out asking for us to continue doing more personal episodes where we talk about our experiences, I think this is a nice way to kick that off, because we'll definitely have more. Any final thoughts that you guys might want to share right now?
I think that about does it for me in terms of this episode. I'm sure there are a lot of thoughts bouncing around all three of us for future topics, future episodes that came up in this discussion, because as you mentioned, we covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, and it's called a divination primer because it's just a primer on ideas as to getting started, as opposed to get, both in terms of just starting out. Tips for divining for most people listening probably are diviners of their own rights. So it's just some ideas and thoughts put forward to kind of simulate their practice and improving, as we all are always attempting to do. And then for those of you who also practice professionally, hopefully some guidance as to knowing when to start, and if you've already started, knowing how to keep going and how to deal with things. But just a few questions, and if there are more that you'd like answered, our patrons get the option to submit questions to us directly to answer monthly in Q&As that are anonymous, so you don't have to specify who you are. But we have some really great questions that are about our lives and about our practices that we get to kind of open up to in a bit more intimate environment, a bit more relaxed with everybody. But in general, if you guys are interested in having episodes, our patrons are able to suggest topics. But for listeners, you're more than welcome to send me on Instagram at Dragon Cunning thoughts about what you would like to see in a future divination episode in general, what kind of questions you'd like to see us answer, since it's definitely coming. And it definitely, I think we should probably get into in the future at some point, not only the styles that we practice, but also thoughts about distinguishing between intrusive thoughts, messages from spirits, our intuitions about our beings, in terms of, bodily awareness, in terms of divining on your divination, right? Having another set of something that is baptized for a spirit to give a quick check-in about, did I get that right? Did I hear that right from you? These kinds of things are always helpful. And then also just kind of like, what's the next step with divination? Turning divination into sorcery, as we mentioned a few times with beans and cards. With that said, I think if you guys are good to go, I can offer our lovely Akashic Records. Key, do you have one?
Yes. So today's Akashic record for me is a bit of a deep cut from Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum.
What?
The band Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum
Whoa.
with the track "The Donkey-Headed Adversary of Humanity" opens the discussion. As is often the case in spicier divinations, donkey-headed adversaries are
I
opening the
love that.
discussion.
That's awesome. I've actually not heard that one. When we finish recording, I'm going to give that a listen. Mine is Peter Ulrich's At Mortlake. That is a beautiful track, very short, that is all about actually John Dee. He doesn't name him, but it is about him. If you know, you know. A man who will be his own episode and will go into scrying and Enochian stuff, I'm sure, at a certain point. It's one of Salt's pocket picks, isn't that right, my love?
Yeah, definitely. Anything related to John Dee, you know.
Oh yeah, Scrying King and Edward Kelly as well. So those are our records, and Key, I pass off to you our dismissal, which is the Old Babylonian prayer of the Divination Priest.
Oh yes, today we get to go to one of the all-time faves. We got to pray for a Peter Pringle.
Yes, Peter Pringle.
That would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all so much for listening today.
Yes, make sure you follow us on twitter.com/Frightful Howls and check out our Patreon, patreon.com/The Frightful Howls. Always our immense gratitude to all our patrons. You get access to Salt's Almanac. You get access to Q&As, the ability to suggest episodes, our plant nerdiness of the month, and all manner of extra goodies. Every patron counts, and it helps us so much to fund extra episodes and bonus content. So with that said, a little plug aside, since we have to do it, here's Q with the Old Babylonian prayer of the Divination Priest.
O Shamash, I am placing in my mouth pure cedar. I am wrapping it for you in the locks of my hair. I am placing for you in my lap compact cedar. I washed my mouth and my hands. I wiped my mouth with compact cedar. I wrapped pure cedar in the locks of my hair. I envelope for you compact cedar. Being clean to the assembly of the gods, I shall draw near for judgment. O Shamash, Lord of Judgment, O Adad, Lord of ritual acts and of divination. In the ritual act I prepare, in the extispicy I perform, put you truth.